We have one set of laws in this country, and they apply to everyone. It's very important for me to note that the defendants in this case must be presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. To that end, my office will seek a speedy trial in this matter, consistent with the public interest and the rights of the accused.
Okay, so let me just lay this out for you right now. Special Counsel Jack Smith has built a case against President Trump that legal experts are calling virtually airtight. We're not talking about circumstantial evidence. We're not talking about he said, she said testimony. We're not talking about legal theories or interpretations or gray areas. We're talking about audio recordings, electronic messages, internal documents, a complete paper trail. The kind of evidence that prosecutors dream about, the kind that makes defense attorneys want to retire early. And according to multiple reports from people who've reviewed the materials, this evidence doesn't just suggest Trump committed crimes, it proves it directly, undeniably, in ways that would guarantee conviction, if not for one tiny little detail, presidential immunity. Yeah, that's the only thing standing between Trump and serious legal consequences right now. Not the strength of the evidence, not reasonable doubt, not lack of proof, just the technical legal question of whether you can prosecute a sitting president. And Smith's team is making it crystal clear the moment that immunity issue is resolved, the moment Trump is no longer protected by his office, prosecution is coming and conviction is virtually assured. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Good afternoon. Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with felony violations of our national security laws, as well as participating in a conspiracy to obstruct justice. This indictment was voted by a grand jury of citizens in the Southern District of Florida, and I invite everyone to read it in full to understand the scope and the gravity of the crimes charged. The men and women of the United States intelligence community and our armed forces dedicate their lives to protecting our nation and its people. Our laws that protect national defense information are critical to the safety and security of the United States, and they must be enforced. Violations of those laws put our country at risk. Adherence to the rule of law is a bedrock principle of the Department of Justice, and our nation's commitment to the rule of law sets an example for the world.
Can you believe this? We're talking about a former president, a sitting president now in his second term, facing what prosecutors are describing as overwhelming documentation of criminal activity, election interference, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, the fake elector scheme, pressuring state officials, inciting violence on January 6th, keeping classified documents, and for each of these allegations, Smith has receipts, audio of Trump personally directing criminal activity, text showing him plotting with top aides, documents proving he signed off on strategies his own lawyers warned were felonies, call logs demonstrating he coordinated illegal schemes, encrypted messages revealing the whole conspiracy. It's all there, all documented, all preserved, all ready for prosecution. And Trump, according to the evidence, knew it was criminal, was warned by his advisors, was told explicitly that these actions could result in felony charges, and approved them anyway, directed them anyway, coordinated them anyway. That's not just criminal activity. That's knowing, willful, intentional criminal activity, the kind that's impossible to defend against, the kind that makes plea deals start looking really attractive. Now here's where this gets really wild, because we're not finding out about this evidence through leaks or rumors or anonymous sources. Smith's team has been filing court documents, releasing reports, laying out the case in official government filings that anyone can read. The final special counsel report, released in January 2025, basically said in formal legal language what everyone's been thinking, that Trump's conduct would have led to conviction, that the only reason he wasn't prosecuted while in office was presidential immunity, that the evidence is solid and the case is strong and justice has been delayed but not defeated. Think about what that means. A special counsel appointed by the Department of Justice reviewed all the evidence and concluded, yeah, this guy committed crimes, multiple crimes, serious crimes, and we have proof, overwhelming proof, the kind of proof that would send any normal person to prison. But because he's president, because of this legal technicality about immunity, we can't move forward right now. But the moment that changes, game on. And the evidence isn't just strong on one or two charges, it's strong across the board. On election interference, Smith has recordings of Trump pressuring officials to find votes, documents showing the fake elector plot, testimony from witnesses who were in the room when these schemes were planned. On January 6th, evidence that Trump knew the crowd was armed, that he wanted them to march to the Capitol, that he watched the violence unfold and refused to stop it, that he saw it as political leverage. On the classified documents, proof that Trump took materials he wasn't supposed to have, refused to return them when asked, obstructed the investigation, lied to his own lawyers about what he had. For every major allegation, every serious charge, the evidence is there, documented, corroborated, ready for trial, and Trump's lawyers know it, his advisors know it, anyone who's looked at the evidence objectively knows it. That's why there's been so much panic in Trump world, so many lawyers quitting, so many witnesses flipping, so many people trying to get immunity deals before the hammer drops, because they've seen the evidence. They know how bad it is. They know that defending against this in court would be nearly impossible. So why should you care? Why does this matter? Because we're watching in real time as the biggest political and legal story of our generation unfolds. We're seeing a former and current president facing virtually guaranteed prosecution once the immunity issue is resolved. We're watching as prosecutors lay out evidence of crimes that would shock us if committed by anyone, let alone someone who held the highest office in the land. And we're seeing how fragile our system of accountability really is, how much it depends on technical, legal questions rather than simple facts about right and wrong. Trump committed crimes, the evidence proves it, but he might never face consequences because of his position, because of timing, because of immunity. That's the story. That's what's happening, and it's way more important than most people realize. So let's break down exactly what evidence Smith has, what crimes it proves, and what happens next. Because trust me, this is the legal reckoning that's been building for years, and it's finally here. Alright, so let's get into what evidence Jack Smith actually has. We're going to start with the election interference stuff, because this is where some of the most damning evidence exists. Smith has audio recordings of Trump calling Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. You probably remember this one. It made headlines when it first came out. Trump on the phone basically saying, "Find me votes. Find exactly enough votes to flip Georgia." And Raffensperger pushing back, saying the votes don't exist. The election results are accurate. We've counted multiple times. And Trump just keeps pushing, keeps insisting there must be fraud, keeps pressuring this state official to somehow manufacture the result Trump wants. Now at the time, some people tried to spin this as just Trump being persistent, just him fighting for what he believed was right, just him exercising his rights to challenge election results. But Smith's evidence shows it goes way beyond that. Shows Trump knew he lost, knew the fraud claims were false, knew he was pressuring officials to do something illegal. How do we know this? Because Smith has testimony from Trump's own advisors, his own campaign officials, his own lawyers, people who told him repeatedly, "You lost. The fraud claims aren't real. There's no path to overturn this election. What you're asking people to do is illegal." And Trump did it anyway. Kept pushing the fraud narrative, kept pressuring officials, kept trying to overturn results he knew were legitimate. That's not exercising legal rights. That's criminal conspiracy. That's election interference. And Smith has it all documented. But it gets worse, because the phone call to Georgia wasn't isolated. Smith has evidence of similar pressure campaigns in other swing states: Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Trump and his team reaching out to state officials, to state legislators, to anyone with potential power to change results, trying to convince them to throw out legitimate votes, to declare fraud that didn't exist, to send alternate electors, to do whatever it took to keep Trump in power, regardless of what voters actually decided. In the fake elector scheme, this is where things get really criminal. Smith has documents showing Trump approved a plan to create fake slates of electors, people who would pretend to be the official electors from states Biden won, who would sign fraudulent documents, who would participate in a coordinated effort to trick Congress into counting the wrong votes. Think about how audacious that is, how fundamentally anti-democratic. You lose an election, so you create fake electors to pretend you won. You submit fraudulent documents to Congress. You try to trick the entire constitutional process. And Smith has proof Trump was at the center of this, approved it, directed it, knew exactly what was happening. There are emails showing coordination between Trump's team and the fake electors, text messages, discussing logistics, call logs proving conversations happen at key moments, and testimony from people involved saying, yeah, Trump knew, Trump approved, Trump wanted this. Some of these fake electors are cooperating now, giving testimony, showing prosecutors the documents they signed, explaining how the scheme worked, and all of it points back to Trump. All of it shows he was directing the operation, that this wasn't some rogue operation by overzealous supporters. This was a coordinated conspiracy approved at the highest levels, and Trump's lawyers warned him. Smith has evidence of that too. Memos from Trump's own legal team saying this is illegal, this could be criminal, you could face prosecution for this. And Trump, according to witness testimony, basically said he didn't care, that he wanted to fight, that he wasn't giving up, that they needed to do whatever it took, even if it meant breaking the law, even if it meant facing criminal charges later. That level of willfulness, that knowing violation of law after being explicitly warned, that's what makes this case so strong. Because Trump can't claim he didn't know, can't claim he was misinformed, can't claim he thought he was acting legally. His own lawyers told him otherwise, and he did it anyway. Now let's talk about January 6th. Because Smith's evidence here is even more disturbing. He has proof that Trump knew the crowd gathering that day was armed, that security officials briefed him on weapons being detected, that people were being turned away from his speech because they had guns and knives and other weapons. And Trump's response, according to witness testimony, was basically that he didn't care, that they weren't there to hurt him, that they should be allowed in anyway. Let them be armed. Let them march to the Capitol. That's what he wanted. Smith has text messages and testimony showing Trump's state of mind that day, showing he saw the riot not as a tragedy, but as leverage, as pressure on Congress, as a way to delay or stop the certification. Multiple witnesses have testified that Trump was watching the violence on TV, that aides were begging him to call it off, to tell people to go home, to condemn the violence, and Trump refused for hours, just watched as the Capitol was overrun, as police were injured, as democracy was under assault. And according to the evidence, he was pleased, thought it might work, thought the pressure might force Congress to do what he wanted. Only when it became clear that the riot had failed, that Congress was going to certify the results anyway, did Trump finally tell people to leave. And even then, his message was weak. Told them he loved them, that they were special, hardly the kind of forceful condemnation you'd expect if someone was genuinely horrified by what was happening. Smith has all of this documented, the timeline of Trump's actions that day, the testimony about what he said privately, the evidence of what he knew and when he knew it, and it paints a picture of someone who saw violence as a political tool, who was willing to let it continue if it served his purposes, who only backed off when it became clear it wasn't working. That's not just poor leadership, that's potentially criminal, using violence as political leverage, failing to stop a riot you incited, obstructing Congress through intimidation and force. Smith's charging documents make clear these aren't just political criticisms, these are potential crimes. Actions that violated federal law, that endangered lives and democracy, and Trump did them knowingly and willfully. Then there's the classified documents case, and honestly, this might be the most straightforward criminal case of the bunch, because the facts are simple. Trump took classified materials when he left office, materials he wasn't authorized to have. The National Archives asked for them back. Trump's lawyers negotiated, said they'd search Mar-a-Lago and return everything. They returned some boxes, but Smith has evidence Trump kept other documents, hid them, lied about having them. There are text messages between Trump and his aides discussing moving boxes, hiding materials from his own lawyers, making sure certain documents didn't get returned. There's testimony from employees at Mar-a-Lago about Trump's instructions, about boxes being moved around, about certain areas being off limits during the search. There are photographs showing classified documents stored in a bathroom, in a ballroom, in completely insecure locations where anyone could potentially access them. And Smith has evidence that Trump showed these documents to people, waved them around at meetings, talked about classified information with people who had no security clearance, no need to know, who shouldn't have been anywhere near that material. This isn't complicated. This isn't some gray area of law. You can't take classified documents. You can't refuse to return them when asked. You can't hide them and lie about having them. You definitely can't show them to random people at your golf club. Any normal person who did this would be prosecuted immediately, would likely go to prison. The only reason Trump hasn't is presidential immunity, the technical legal question of whether you can prosecute a sitting president. But Smith's report makes clear the evidence is there. The crimes are provable. The case is strong. And the moment immunity is no longer an issue, prosecution will follow. Now, Trump and his defenders will say this is all political, that Smith is biased, that the investigation was a witch hunt, that the evidence is overblown, or taken out of context. But here's the thing. Smith has actual evidence, not theories, not interpretations, physical evidence, audio recordings you can listen to, documents you can read, witness testimony from people who were there. And much of this evidence comes from Trump's own team, his own lawyers and advisors and employees, people who worked for him and supported him and now are testifying against him. Why? Because the evidence is overwhelming, because they know what Trump did, and because many of them don't want to go to prison protecting him. That's what makes this case so dangerous for Trump. It's not just prosecutors claiming things, it's his own people confirming them, providing documents, filling in details, creating a complete picture of criminal conspiracy and obstruction. And Smith has structured the case carefully, built it methodically, anticipated defenses and addressed them. The final report reads like a prosecutor who knows he has a slam dunk case and is just waiting for the right moment to present it. That moment will come when the immunity issue is resolved, when Trump is no longer president, when the technical legal barriers fall away, and all that's left is evidence and law. And when that happens, according to Smith's team and legal experts who've reviewed the materials, conviction is virtually certain because the evidence is that strong, the case is that solid, the proof is that overwhelming. Trump committed crimes, serious crimes, multiple crimes, and Smith can prove it. That's the bottom line. That's what all this evidence adds up to. That's why prosecutors are confident. That's why Trump's team is panicking. That's why this story matters so much. We're watching the legal walls close in on the president, watching as evidence accumulates, watching as the case gets stronger and stronger. And eventually, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually that evidence will be presented in court. Those charges will be filed, that prosecution will move forward, and Trump will face consequences, real legal consequences, the kind you can't tweet away, or fundraise away, or spin away, the kind that come from crimes proven with overwhelming evidence. That's what's coming. That's what Jack Smith has built. That's what all this evidence guarantees. Okay, so let's talk about what this all means practically speaking. First, we need to understand the immunity issue, because that's the big question hanging over everything. Can you prosecute a sitting president? Does the office provide protection from criminal charges? And if so, what happens when someone leaves office? These aren't just academic questions. These are the legal barriers keeping Trump from facing charges right now. The Supreme Court has never definitively ruled on whether sitting presidents can be prosecuted. There's Department of Justice policy saying they can't, but that's just policy, not law. And even that policy acknowledges that former presidents can be prosecuted after leaving office. So the clock is ticking. Every day Trump remains in office is another day the immunity issue protects him. But the moment he leaves, whether that's at the end of his term, or through resignation, or impeachment, or whatever, that protection disappears. And Smith's evidence doesn't expire, doesn't go away, doesn't become less compelling with time. If anything, it gets stronger as more witnesses cooperate, as more documents surface, as the full picture becomes clearer. So Trump is essentially on borrowed time, living under temporary protection that will eventually end. And when it does, when the immunity shield drops, Smith is ready to go. The charges are drafted. The evidence is compiled. The case is built. All that's left is filing the paperwork and moving forward with prosecution. And conviction, according to legal experts who've reviewed Smith's evidence, is virtually assured. Because you can't defend against audio recordings of yourself committing crimes. You can't explain away documents you signed approving illegal schemes. You can't dismiss testimony from your own lawyers and advisors saying they warned you this was criminal. The evidence is too strong, too direct, too overwhelming. Any normal defendant facing this kind of case will be looking at plea deals, trying to negotiate reduced charges, hoping to avoid the maximum sentence. But Trump, he's not a normal defendant. He can't just plea out quietly. His ego won't allow it. His political brand depends on claiming victimhood and persecution. So he'll fight. He'll claim the prosecution is political. He'll attack Smith and the evidence and the entire process. He'll try to make this about corruption and witch hunts and deep state conspiracies. But none of that changes the facts. None of that makes the evidence disappear. None of that prevents conviction when the case actually goes to trial. You can spin all you want in press conferences and on social media, but in a courtroom with a judge and jury and rules of evidence, the facts matter, the proof matters, and Smith has both in abundance. Second, let's talk about the political implications, because this isn't just a legal story. This is the biggest political crisis of Trump's presidency, maybe of his entire political career. He's facing virtually guaranteed prosecution and conviction. That's not speculation. That's what prosecutors are saying, based on the evidence. And that reality, that looming legal reckoning, changes everything politically. It affects his ability to govern, his relationship with Congress, his standing with voters, his control over the Republican Party, because it's hard to maintain political power when everyone knows you're facing serious criminal charges, when the evidence of your crimes is public, when prosecutors are openly saying conviction is assured. Some Republicans will stick with Trump no matter what, will claim the prosecution is unfair, will defend him regardless of evidence. But others, especially those facing tough re-election battles, will start distancing themselves, will stop defending the indefensible, will recognize that loyalty to Trump might cost them their seats, and donors will get nervous, will wonder if they're backing someone with no political future, will start looking for alternatives, and Republican primary challengers will emerge, will see an opening, will offer the party a way forward that doesn't involve defending someone facing virtually certain conviction. This is how political coalitions crack. Not all at once, not in some dramatic break, but gradually, through accumulated pressure, through calculations about self-interest, through recognition that the current path is unsustainable. And Smith's evidence, the sheer overwhelming weight of it, accelerates that process, makes it harder to defend Trump, easier to break away, more politically viable to choose a different direction. We're already seeing the beginning of this. The quiet murmurs about alternatives, the donors hedging their bets, the politicians carefully leaving themselves room to pivot. It's not a revolt yet, not a coordinated break, but the seeds are being planted. And as the legal situation gets worse, as prosecution becomes more certain, those seeds will grow. Third, we need to talk about accountability, about what it means that a president can commit crimes and face no consequences while in office. That the only thing standing between Trump and prosecution is a technical legal question about immunity. That justice is delayed purely because of his position, rather than any doubt about his guilt. This should bother everyone regardless of politics. Because if presidents are effectively above the law while in office, if they can commit crimes without immediate consequence, then what stops them from doing whatever they want? What constrains their power? What protects democracy? The founders didn't intend for presidents to be kings, didn't want anyone above the law. The whole point of the American system was to reject that kind of absolute power. But here we are, watching a president who committed crimes avoid prosecution because of his office, watching justice delayed because of technical legal barriers, watching the system struggle to hold powerful people accountable. And that's dangerous, not just because of Trump specifically, but because of the precedent it sets, the message it sends, the incentives it creates for future presidents who might be tempted to break the law if they know they're protected while in office. Smith's evidence doesn't just prove Trump committed crimes, it proves the system has serious flaws, serious gaps in accountability, serious questions about whether anyone is truly equal under the law. And those questions should concern all of us, should make us think about reforms, about ways to close loopholes, about how to ensure that presidential power doesn't mean presidential immunity from consequences. Because democracy can't survive if leaders know they're above the law, if they can commit crimes without fear of punishment, if justice is only for ordinary people but not for the powerful. Fourth, let's talk about what happens next, where this goes from here. Smith has built his case, compiled his evidence, made his conclusions public. Now he waits for the immunity issue to be resolved, waits for Trump to leave office, waits for the moment when prosecution becomes legally possible. And when that moment comes, he moves forward, files charges, presents evidence, takes Trump to trial. And if the evidence is as strong as everyone says, if conviction is virtually assured, then Trump faces prison time. Real consequences, the kind that change everything. Now, will Trump actually go to prison? That's hard to say. First, he has to be convicted, then sentenced, then exhaust his appeals. That process could take years. And along the way, there are opportunities for plea deals, for reduced charges, for negotiated outcomes. Trump might avoid prison through legal maneuvering, through deals with prosecutors, through pure luck and delay. But he can't avoid the charges, can't avoid the trial, can't avoid the evidence being presented publicly in a way that's impossible to ignore or spin away. That's guaranteed. That's what Smith's work ensures. That Trump will face a legal reckoning, that the evidence will be aired, that accountability, even if delayed, even if imperfect, will eventually come. Fifth, and finally, we need to acknowledge what this moment represents historically. We're watching the potential prosecution of a former and current president for serious crimes. That's never happened before in American history. Yes, Nixon faced potential prosecution but resigned and was pardoned. Yes, other presidents have been impeached but not criminally charged. But this actual criminal prosecution supported by overwhelming evidence, this is unprecedented. And it matters not just because of Trump, but because of what it says about American democracy, about whether our system can hold powerful people accountable, whether the rule of law applies equally, whether crimes committed by presidents have consequences. Smith's evidence gives us a chance to answer those questions, to prove that no one is above the law, that even presidents face accountability, that justice, though sometimes delayed, eventually comes. That's huge. That's the kind of thing that defines a nation's character, that shapes its future trajectory, that determines whether democracy survives or slides toward authoritarianism, where leaders face no consequences. So when we talk about Smith's evidence guaranteeing serious consequences for Trump, we're talking about more than just one man's legal troubles. We're talking about a test of American institutions, a measure of whether our system works, a referendum on whether accountability exists for the powerful. And the answer we get, the way this plays out, will echo for generations, will set precedents future prosecutors and presidents reference, will shape how Americans think about law and power and democracy. That's why this matters. That's why Smith's evidence is so significant. That's why we should all be paying attention to what happens next, because we're watching history unfold, watching as the most documented case of presidential criminality ever assembled moves toward prosecution, watching as the system faces its greatest test, and the outcome, whatever it is, will define us, will show who we are as a nation, will prove whether the ideals we claim to value actually matter when tested. That's the real story here. Not just Trump's crimes, but whether we have the courage and commitment to hold him accountable, whether our institutions are strong enough, whether justice exists for everyone or just for some. Smith's evidence gives us the tools, provides the proof, creates the opportunity. Now we have to decide what to do with it, whether we rise to the moment or fail the test. The choice is ours, and history is watching.